Welcome to our briefing on Vietnam's innovation ecosystem. 2025 wasn't just another year of growth for the country's startups, it was a year of profound transformation. We're going to dive into the key findings from the Invention Lab's latest report to really unpack what's driving this incredible momentum. All right, let's kick things off with a big picture. In 2025, while a lot of global economies were, struggling, Vietnam really stood out. We're talking about a remarkable 8% GDP growth. That kind of resilience, it's the bedrock for everything else we're about to discuss. And, of course, that kind of economic strength, it translates directly into investor confidence. More than $400 million in venture funding poured into the country's startups. That's a huge signal, right? It tells you that both local and international players were and are betting big on Vietnam's future. So, to really get a handle on this story, we're going to break it down into 4 key parts. We'll start with the macro environment, then look at the game-changing policies that were put in place. After that, we'll zoom in on the investment trends for 2025, and finally, we'll shine a spotlight on some of the market leaders who are really making things happen on the ground. Okay, first up, the macroeconomic backdrop. Let's dig into that economic engine. What exactly made Vietnam such fertile ground for innovation in 2025? Well, for one thing, the country hit a huge new milestone. We saw nominal GDP surpass the $500 billion mark for the very first time. And look, that's not just a big, abstract number. It's a reflection of real gains in productivity and a seriously booming domestic market. And this kind of growth, it doesn't just happen by accident. It was really propelled by a powerful trifecta: proactive credit being funneled into high-tech sectors, sustained public investment, and a really smart structural upgrade in the kind of foreign direct investment the country was attracting. Now, this brings us to our second point, a policy-driven transformation, because that economic growth didn't happen in a vacuum. What's so interesting here is how the government's role fundamentally shifted. They went from being, a supportive observer to the active architect of a startup nation. In 2025, we saw 3 landmark government initiatives that completely changed the game for startups and investors. First, you have Resolution 57, which set the new innovation-led strategy. Then came Decree 264, establishing a game-changing national VC fund. And finally, the AI law, which created a modern legal framework to really catalyze development. Let's double-click on that National Venture Capital Fund for a second, because this is a huge deal. A state-backed fund with a mandate that literally allows for investment losses up to 50%, that's almost unheard of. It sends an incredibly powerful message. We're willing to deploy long-term, patient capital and take on significant risk to back early-stage and deep-tech ventures. That's the kind of capital that the private markets just aren't structured to provide. Okay, so that brings us to our next section, 2025 Investment in Focus. With this powerful new economic and policy backdrop, where did the capital actually flow? The data for the year points to a really clear trend. It was a year of selective, high-conviction capital. Right, so investors weren't just spraying and praying, if you will. The era of easy money was over. They were being selective, which leads to the obvious question: where did this smart money actually go? The data shows a really clear concentration. 2 sectors absolutely dominated. Health tech led the pack, pulling in over $147 million. That's a whopping 37% of total investment value. And right behind it was climate tech, which attracted over $100 million of its own. And that climate tech sector in particular was really catching a strong tailwind from both policy commitments and international support. You had events like the Net Zero Challenge, co-organized by major players like Touchstone Partners and Temasek Foundation, creating this incredible, vibrant hub for innovation. And you can see this playing out across the board. I mean, look at this table. You've got significant seed rounds like the $20 million for CME or nearly $2 million for Smart Solar. But then you also have these huge growth stage deals like the massive $70 million Series A for TechCo. All right, so that's the data. But numbers and charts only tell part of the story, right? To make these trends a bit more concrete, let's put a spotlight on a couple of the market leaders who are turning all this potential into tangible growth. First up is that company we just saw on the chart, TechCoop. They are operating right at that crucial intersection of agriculture and climate tech, a really hot space right now. So what do? Essentially, TechScoop's mission is to drive the digital transformation of Vietnam's agricultural value chains. They've built this end-to-end B2B platform that gives small and medium-sized farms access to markets, finance, and technology, all with a focus on sustainable, export-ready production.
And in 2025, their model got a massive vote of confidence from investors. They close a landmark $70 million Series A. To put that in perspective, that's one of the largest agri-tech financing rounds in Vietnam's history.
Okay, next up, let's shift gears. Literally, we're moving into the mobility space to talk about Dat Bike. These guys are on a mission to accelerate the country's green transition one electric motorbike at a time. Their whole mission is about driving the mass adoption of green transportation. But here's their key differentiator: vertical integration. They're not just importing kits from overseas and slapping them together. No, they design and manufacture their high-performance bikes completely in-house, tailoring them specifically for local conditions. And that strategy is clearly working. It attracted a strategic $22 million Series B investment in late 2025. And that capital is all about one thing: scaling up their industrial manufacturing. So when you take a step back, what's the big takeaway from 2025? It's this: Vietnam's startup ecosystem is maturing. It's shifting from growth at all costs to a much more strategic focus. The ecosystem is now positioned to produce fewer, but much more globally competitive companies. It's a classic pivot from quantity to quality. And that, of course, leaves us with a really exciting question for the future. As you see policy and capital align like this, and as market leaders start to emerge, which sector do you think will produce Vietnam's next unicorn? Will it be health tech, climate tech, something else entirely? It's going to be a fascinating space to watch.